It is 4 o'clock, so we will call our December meeting of the Garrett County Board of Education to order. The first item on the agenda is the public comment, and we have no one has signed up at the 4 o'clock. Be another opportunity at 7:30 tonight. All right, that being the case, our first item of business is to go into executive session, and under the general provisions of Article 3-305B, there are three reasons for going into executive session tonight. One is to discuss the appointment, employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of appointees, employees, or officials over whom this public body has jurisdiction, and other personnel matters that affect one or more specific individuals. To consult with counsel to obtain legal advice on a legal matter, and to conduct collective bargaining negotiations or consider matters that relate to the negotiations. The topics under personnel will be a staff update and superintendent goals. Under legal is legal advice regarding funding issues, and under negotiations, the Healthcare Trust Healthcare Coalition as related to negotiations. Personnel topics will be considered in closed session rather than open session because they include discussion of specific employees, which is a confidential employment matter. Legal advice, because that's attorney-client privilege, as we receive specific legal advice from counsel, and under collective bargaining because of the negotiations process itself. So, with that said, is there a motion to go into executive session for those stated reasons? So moved. Motion by Mr. Woods. Is there a second? Second by Monica. So, been moved by Mr. Woods, second by Mrs. Rinker. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, nay. We are in executive session. All right, it is time to reopen our public session of the December Garrett County Board of Education meeting. Our first item of business, if you're able to please stand and join us in a moment of silence, and then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance led by our student board member. Our first item of business is the approval of our agenda for this evening's meeting. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Motion by Mr. Woods. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Gladfeldy. Any discussion on the agenda? Okay, the motion to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. It is approved. Next item will be the approval of the November 12th public session minutes. Is there a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Motion by Mrs. Rinker. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Siebold. Been moved and seconded to approve the November 12th, 2019 public session minutes. Any further discussion?
No.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The minutes are approved. Closed session summaries. Mrs. Baker.
Thank you. Thank you. The Board of Education met in executive session on Tuesday, November 12, 2019 at Central Office in the boardroom at 4:02 p.m. under Authority 3-305 of the General Provisions Article of the Annotated Code of Maryland to discuss the following items: review of executive session minutes, personnel topics pursuant to 3-305B1, negotiation topics pursuant to 3-305B9, legal topic pursuant to 305B7, and administrative function topics. Tom Woods made a motion to close the meeting, and Charlotte Siebold seconded the motion. Thereafter, the board unanimously voted to close the session with a yea vote from Rodney Glatfelty, Monica Rinker, Charlotte Siebold, and Tom Woods. The topics discussed in the closed session included the following: executive session minutes. The board reviewed the executive session minutes from the October 8th, 2019 meeting. Tom Woods made a motion to approve the minutes, and Monica Rinker seconded the motion. The board approved the minutes. Yea vote, Rodney Glatfelty, Tom Woods, Monica Rinker, and Charlotte Siebold. Personnel pursuant to 3-305B1, non-certificated personnel. Dr. Jane Wildison, Director of Human Resources, shared with the board non-certificated employees that were recently hired. Employee investigation, Dr. Wilderson provided an update on an employee investigation. Employee appeal, Mrs. Baker provided an update on an employee appeal. The board considered these matters but did not take action on these topics. Negotiations. Composition of negotiation teams, Dr. Jane Wilderson, Director of Human Resources, and Mrs. Allison Schweitzer, Director of Finance, presented the recommended composition of the 2019-2020 Garrett County Board of Education negotiation teams to the board for their approval. Tom Woods made a motion to accept the proposed composition of the 2019-2020 Garrett County Board of Education negotiation teams with the stipulation that alternate representatives be considered in the future. Monica Rinker seconded the motion. The board unanimously approved the motion with a yea vote from Monica Rinker, Charlotte Siebold, Rodney Glotfelty, and Tom Woods. Healthcare Coalition. Ms. Schweitzer, Director of Finance, provided an update on the Healthcare Coalition. The board considered this information but took no action on the matter. Legal. The board sought legal guidance on capital funding and spending requests. The board took this matter into consideration but did not take any action on this item. Mrs. Baker, Superintendent, discussed administrative function topics with the board. The board took these matters into consideration but took no action. The board recessed the executive session at 5:35 p.m., and the board returned to executive session at 9:40 p.m. to continue administrative function topics. Tom Woods made a motion to adjourn the executive session, and Rodney Glotfelty seconded the motion. The board unanimously approved adjourning the executive session at 10:51 p.m. with a yea vote from Rodney Glotfelty, Charlotte Siebold, Monica Rinker, and Tom Woods. Board members present included Dr. Matthew Paugh, Board President, Mr. Tom Woods, Vice President, Board members Mr. Rodney Glotfelty, Ms. Monica Rinker, Mrs. Charlotte Siebold, Mrs. Barbara Baker, Secretary, Treasurer, Superintendent of Schools, Mr. Brandon Hoover, Board Attorney, Ms. Karen DeVore, Executive Director of Curriculum Instruction Administration, were also present for the meeting. Dr. Jane Wilderson, Director of Human Resources, Mrs. Allison Schweitzer, Director of Finance, were also present for part of the meeting. Ms. Karen Brewer, Executive Assistant to the Superintendent, was present at the meeting for the purpose of taking minutes. No. Okay. Closed session summary for December 3rd. The Board of Education met in executive session on Tuesday, December 3rd, 2019 at 4 p.m. in room 103 of the GEIC building at Garrett College for the purpose of administrative function. The board met as an administrative function to evaluate its board member relations, community relations, superintendent relations, and fiscal management. No action was taken at this meeting. The board concluded its business and the meeting adjourned at 7 p.m. Present for the meeting were Dr. Matthew Paugh, Board President, Mr. Tom Woods, Vice President, Board members Mr. Rodney Glotfelty, Mrs. Monica Rinker, Mrs. Charlotte Siebold, and Mrs. Barbara Baker, Secretary, Treasurer, Superintendent of Schools.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, moving on to our recognitions. Our first recognition tonight is the Northern Garrett cross-country team, girls cross-country team, who won the 1A Maryland State Championship on Saturday, November 9th at Hereford High School in Parkton, Maryland. They beat Brunswick High School 40-45 for the team championship. Northern finished with 5 girls in the top 20. They were Sophia Brown, Ella Ashby, Minka Amtower, Arison Amtower, Ella Warnick, Tiffany Niner, and Nicole Savage. Prior to the regional and state championships, the team placed first at the SSMAC Championships, Pumpkin Run, and the Husky Pride Invitational. At the 1A West Championship on October 31st at Smithsburg High School, the team came in second place with 5 girls placing in the top 20. So if members of the team are here, if you could come up and join us here. We did receive a letter from Jaron Hawkins, who's the head coach. He expresses his regrets because he's not able to be here tonight. But I read just a part of his letter. He says, state championships are a great accomplishment, but there are greater and more lasting achievements and lessons that this team can take away with them. High school athletic programs are meant to be an extension of the classroom. While I may not be a teacher, it has always been my hope that any team that I have coached has athletes who have grown to be better students and better citizens. This girls' team is made up of a range of students from freshmen to seniors, artistic free thinkers to scientific fact finders, country music fans to rap aficionados, those who love Panera bread and those who prefer sheets. It is a ragtag group. of kids who were willing to work hard for themselves and for each other, kids who saw a larger vision than a state championship, kids who literally carried each other in times of struggle, kids who were the epitome of great teammates. After all, there are not great teams without great teammates. And then speaking to the board, he thanks us for being teammates as well. He says this: if cross country is not, even if cross country is not the most popular sport, we receive a ton of support from the community, and a team is not an island either. Any success that the girls team has had has been built upon years and years of great athletes, coaches, supportive parents, an interested school staff, a great athletic director, and a board of education that continues to value the positive role that secondary athletics can play for students of all backgrounds. So we appreciate that from Coach Hawkins.
Nope. There we're safe. I think we're safe. Yeah. We have last. Done really well. Oh, I know. That's the biggest success story we've had at this school for a long time. That's, people don't realize how hard that is to do. Yeah.
And it's not just the band, it's parents.
Yeah, everybody has to buy into that. The kids to come to practice for hours and hours and hours.
I think Mr. Woods has our next recognition, which is the PBIS Gold and Silver Award Schools.
Broadford Elementary and Grantsville Elementary received the PBIS Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports Maryland Gold Status Award, and Northern Middle School received the PBIS Maryland Silver Status Award. Status Award is the highest level of recognition available in the PBIS program. The level of recognition, sustainability for the systems, data utilization for school-wide positive behavior interventions and support, as well as positive effects on both school discipline years. The level is the PBIS Maryland Silver Recognition Award, intended for those schools that have successfully implemented school-wide PBIS and can demonstrate that their implementation has had positive effects on their discipline data for at least 1 year. PBIS is a framework or approach for assisting school personnel in adopting and organizing evidence-based behavioral interventions into an integrated continuum through defining, teaching, and acknowledging behavior expectations. By reinforcing positive behaviors, schools find that teachers spend more time teaching as classroom disruptions, office referrals, and suspensions are reduced. So it's with great honor that we have 3 schools this year that have been designated either gold or status awards, and the gold awards are Broadford once again at Grantsville, with a silver award that is also going to Northern Middle. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Woods, and congratulations to those schools. I forgot the announcements, so there's only 4 announcements. December 11th is staff development, 3-hour early dismissal. December 20th, 3-hour early dismissal. December 23rd through January 1st is the winter break, so schools are closed, and the schools reopen January 2nd.
Thank you.
All right. Our next item of business is the Strategic Facilities Committee final report. So we'll invite Dr. Lever to come and make a presentation to us this evening. Thank you, Dr. Lever.
Is this working now? Can you hear? Can you hear now? Okay, good. Thank you. Well, good evening. And thank you very much for having me this evening. And thank you especially for letting me be the facilitator for this very long, very interesting, and I think very rewarding process that we've been through. I also want to thank the members of the Strategic Facilities Committee, those who are here, those who couldn't make it tonight. They put in an enormous amount of work, a lot of hours, a lot of meeting time, a lot of great discussion, very honest and candid discussion. And I'm hoping that out of this will come a plan that will be useful to you. I also want to thank Ms. Baker and her staff. We couldn't have done it without you. The information that you provided, the assistance you provided, and special thanks to Ms. Karen Brewer over there, who was really the person who kept all this running very, very smoothly. You have a very difficult situation. Let me make sure this is working. Yes, here we go. Members of the committee on the screen now, and the staff who participated, and I couldn't name everybody who participated, but they know who they are. The situation that you have now is that you're facing a very broad spectrum of facility needs. You have an aging building plant. It's almost about 32 years old, the average square footage. The categories of work cover just about everything conceivable: security, open space classrooms, educational support program spaces, older building systems, overcrowding or near overcrowding, schools that have especially extensive educational facility deficiencies, there are 4 of them, and community support spaces that are lacking in many schools. No single category of work dominates the others. That's part of the reason that this is so difficult. There's a general overall underutilization of the schools at 63%, and this means that funds are going into the operation of schools that could be going into instruction, but you have excessive square footage overall. There are great differences around the county, however, and there are inequities in school conditions. Facilities in the southern region have generally more deficiencies than those in the north, measured by educational adequacy, by class size, the age of the square footage. They're approximately 9 years older than the schools in the north. Measured by utilization, current and projected, and that's shown in the map that you have up here, looking at the projected 2023-2024 school year. I think you can see by the percentages that these are only elementary schools. The elementary schools in the south are trending towards overcapacity or will be overcapacity by substantial amounts, whereas the elementary schools in the north will be under capacity. And you also have differences in deferred maintenance and unscheduled maintenance calls between the north and the south. The background here you're already familiar with, so I'll be very brief. The enrollment projections overall, according to our own analysis, are flat for the next decade, modest increase in elementary projections, modest decrease in the secondary projections. The demographic projections developed by the Maryland Department of Planning based on the 2010 census support this, that the population has been aging since 1970 and is projected to continue to age through 2040, which means that the age cohorts that feed into the school system will be a relatively smaller proportion of the total population. In fact, they are projected to decrease rather than simply remain flat. And then facility utilization, with enrollments remaining flat, if the overall configuration of schools doesn't change, the facility utilization will also remain low. Secondary schools particularly will be all underutilized. The northern schools will be underutilized, and southern elementary schools, however, will be at or over capacity. So you're facing very difficult choices. You have pressing capital improvements. There's a need for greater efficiency. You have the Southern Middle School, Broadford Elementary School situation. You have a roof that has to be replaced there. Our estimate is that it will cost about $2.5 million in the summer of 2020 to replace that roof. And you also have the single high school question, which is looming. And all of this confronting you in an environment of extreme fiscal constraint. Operational efficiencies would be needed to free up funds to support educational programs, and the county government has limited borrowing capacity. Debt payments are competing for many needs across the county and other needs within the school system. The Kerwin Commission, this is an unknown. The next legislative session will know a great deal more by the close of the session about what new funding might be made available to school systems, but along with that are also going to come new obligations. And so we don't know what the impact of that is going to be in terms of the total budget. We had a very extensive community engagement process, and the committee recognizes that the community is deeply attached to the community schools. They find in these schools a nurturing environment for the young children, good educational results coming out of them. The schools are definitely a focus of community identity. We found these preferences. We had 6 community engagement sessions, 3 in May, 3 in September. We've had numerous emails and letters, and individual members of the committee also expressed these feelings very, very strongly. And these preferences are supported by research that was done by one of the subcommittees, and that report is in Supplement 1 of your report. So the community does like the community schools. They also like small schools. They do not want to see consolidation of schools or student reassignments, redistricting. And the community is highly concerned about the mixing of age groups in schools through grade band reconfiguration. We heard these opinions, and they very much were the majority opinion, as compared to a fairly small number of people who spoke about the possibilities of consolidation and so forth. So from this majority view, from community input, the view would be to retain the existing configuration of the schools. As to say, retain the current grade configuration, to retain the current number of schools, no closures, no consolidations, no reassignments, and maintain the current student assignments. The important thing to understand is that this is a choice that could be made by the board. And if it were to be made, it should be made deliberately and made understanding the consequences that are involved. It means that the inequities in facility condition, overcrowding, and so forth between North and South will persist. It means operational inefficiency will persist. You'll have excess square footage that you'll have to maintain and take care of and heat and cool. That means less funding will be available for the classroom or for debt service that could support building improvements. It also means that you will find it difficult to maintain continuous support for services in some schools, and really this affects the specialists, speech, vision, the people who are needed in the schools and maybe needed on a full-time basis but can't because of the small populations. There's an inefficient use of instructors' time in travel between schools. And then again, the Kerwin Commission, we don't know what the impact of that is going to be. So the condition is going to worsen, not improve. You also will see a declining physical plant. There are not sufficient funds in the operating budget to maintain and improve your 750,000 square feet of instructional space. That does not include the central office space. That's just the instructional space. You have very good maintenance. I've reviewed the maintenance, and out of 26 inspections that were done by the Interagency Committee, 25 received good or superior. That is outstanding. I think possibly Cecil County over in the far northeast might have a record that's comparable to that. So kudos to your staff, but it's like any physical asset. Good maintenance is fighting uphill against age and deterioration, which will happen inevitably because of the age of the facilities. you will see an increasing number of unscheduled maintenance calls. These are expensive calls. They disrupt normal maintenance activities. In some rare cases, they could actually be emergency calls where a school has to be shut down or delayed opening until an issue is fixed. That's rare. Most of the unscheduled maintenance calls can be taken care of without treating them as emergencies. But as according to your staff, the number of these unscheduled incidents is increasing, and with the aging of the facilities, they're only going to continue to increase. There is also the possibility that you'll see a reduction of state funding. I can't say for sure about that, because the way the state measures funding for major capital projects, it looks at overall capacity. And if there is excess capacity, you'll still receive funding, but you might receive a reduced amount of state funding for capital projects. So that's something to be aware of as also. To begin to consider alternatives, the problem, I think, is that you simply don't have sufficient information at this time. That's where I think the strategic plan comes in and can be helpful, that it helps to remedy the situation. First of all, by providing recommendations for immediate facility needs. These are, in a sense, the obvious projects that need to be done. We can assess costs and schedules for these types of projects with a fair degree of accuracy. Our assumptions can always be challenged, and we can also be shown wrong in the assumptions, but this is a standard part of facility management. Hopefully, these types of projects are not too controversial, and I'll come back to them as we go through recommendations. But in addition to specific projects, the committee is recommending a process that will lead you in a fairly short time to the kind of information that you do need to be able to make informed decisions. The scope and cost of the Southern Middle School Broadford project, the enrollments that it should sustain and that it can sustain, which will have a direct impact on its cost. The impacts that this project will have on other projects and other actions. The schedule for funding that particular project as well as other projects. Any consequences that are related to redistricting or grade band reconfiguration, and any consequences that are related because of the funding issue to school closures. And I'll come back to this. This is a very complex, and we found this in our discussions, an extraordinarily complex set of issues to try to grasp and to try to express, and I hope to be able to get to that this evening. Funding is always a major problem. The total cost estimate of the recommendations presented before you is $50.6 million over 6 years. That's a staggering amount of money. But for the purposes of comparison, you can look at a standard figure which is used, or methodology which is used in the facilities industry called current replacement value. What would be the cost to replace all of your facilities? The figure of $232 million you see here is for facilities over 20 years old. So this does not include Southern or Northern Middle School. It also does not include any of the central office buildings. It does include the Hickory Environmental Center, which is fairly small. $232 million is generated using standard dollar per square foot figures, soft costs, and so forth. And those figures are in Supplement 2 in your report. The industry standard says that a public owner should be putting in capital expenditure of about 2% per year of the total CRV, the total current replacement value of its portfolio, under an assumption that the facilities have a 50-year life. So in the case of Garrett County Public Schools, that would mean you should be putting in about an average of $4.6 million per year. Your 10-year capital expenditure would be about $46 million. You have to add to that the deferred maintenance backlog that needs to be corrected, which was estimated in early 2018 at over $37 million. Adding to that the cost of escalation, soft costs, and so forth, that would come to $53 million. So you're looking at close to $100 million over 10 years as what industry would say you need to be putting into your facilities here, about $9.9 million per year. Now, I do want to say that 2% standard is very rarely met by any school system, any military base, any university. but it is an industry standard as a kind of a benchmark that helps us to see how well we're doing. So you can see that the $8.4 million that's associated with the $50.6 million estimate from the Strategic Facilities Committee is not out of line with what industry would say you ought to be putting into your facilities now. The operating budget and the fund balance are not sufficient. Issuing debt is the standard way that owners, public owners, manage for capital assets. The sources to support capital debt, we can look to the state. The state provides grants that can write down the total cost of the project and therefore reduce the amount of debt that has to be issued by the local government. The state is extremely likely to be responsive, I think, to Garrett County Public Schools. And I'll come back to that. They already have been, and I'm expecting a favorable response by the IAC day after tomorrow when they make their decision on the Southern High School building envelope. We also anticipate that the General Assembly will increase the goal. The original goal was $250 million per year. That was established in the 2004 session over an 8-year period. That was exceeded. The new goal, I believe, will be $400 million. I hope that that is the outcome. But also the state-local cost share for Garrett County should be re-examined. The local source for supporting debt comes from basically two sources. One is the property tax, and the other is avoided expenses. You can avoid expenses by streamlining of operations. You're likely to get very little out of that, something, but very little. The main way that you're going to be able to achieve a reduction of your expenses is, unfortunately, through school closure. That's how you'll be able to leverage a substantial amount of funding for capital improvements. There are other consequences that come from school closure, of course. It's not only financial. These are very difficult decisions. Choices should be made on the basis of fairness and objectivity. That applies to everything: capital projects, redistricting, grade band reconfiguration, school closures. All action should consider community impacts and community inputs, and your strategic plan is an instrument that I think can help in this process. It's a long-term instrument of policy that the board can refer back to and future boards can refer back to as a kind of guidance for individual decisions. It's also a process that helps to resolve disputes that are bound to emerge. There are bound to be competing priorities in any allocation of funding, and the capital planning process is a way to resolve them. It's a mechanism for resolving these kinds of diverse priorities. It's an instrument that clarifies choices, and it's also dynamic. It evolves because new needs are going to emerge, and it has to be re-examined periodically on a regular basis. And there are models for that around the state that I could point you to of how school systems do that. The Strategic Facilities Committee worked under guiding principles of educational excellence, equity, and appreciation for the value of community schools. These emerged through discussions. There was never a formal mission statement. These were simply the values that we constantly returned to in our discussions. But they did lead to some specific goals, which I've mentioned in an earlier presentation, that you have limited capital dollars, address the largest number of the most critical facility deficiencies, improve the learning environment for the largest number of students, correct inequities in the quality of facilities, and improve the efficiency of operations. So before this committee was the problem, what combination of projects and initiatives will maximize the four goals? I've talked about the strategic planning process before, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. Basically 5 episodes that overlapped. The research episode, April through August, involved an informational workshop in April, document review by members of the committee and myself, analysis of educational adequacy, and then the 4 subcommittees did in-depth research into these topics: alternative education, grade band reconfiguration, community schools, and single high school, and you have those reports in your supplement. We had community listening sessions in May. We developed the planning options and preliminary recommendations, June through August, presented them to this board on September 10th, and then had community feedback sessions in the following week. And then you have before you now the final report and recommendations. So to turn to the recommendations, first is a process issue. We recommend establishing a joint capital planning group. This would be a group composed of staff from the Board of Education and from the Board of County Commissioners who would meet regularly for coordination, to receive input from stakeholders as appropriate to the particular task under consideration, identify and resolve obstacles, report back to their respective governing bodies, develop funding models, and investigate sources of fundings, and address a host of other issues. These structures have worked very well in Wicomico County. I don't think it's still operative, but it was very effective for a period, and I myself was involved in Prince George's County for a period of 3 to 4 years in a group that met regular monthly meetings between 3 agencies, and out of that came resolution of issues, excellent staff-to-staff relationships that helped to resolve issues so that we could take unified recommendations to our respective governing bodies. A great number of benefits, and really this is just about communication. Our second recommendation gets into these near-term capital projects that I hope are not too controversial. Security. Implement up to 5 security vestibule projects in FY 2021. The projects would be identified and prioritized by the superintendent and staff. Undertake additional projects in FY 2022 so that all the schools will have a security vestibule. Investigate whether bulletproof glass can be used as a substitute for tempered glass. There is some experience in the costing of that recently in Kent County, so you have something to draw on there. And then also defer security vestibules for Southern Middle and Broadford Elementary School until decisions are made in early 2021 about the scope of that project, because that will affect what is done in terms of the security vestibules. Obvious need to improve the control of the school environment, and the great benefit that I've heard talking to administrators and teachers is they know who's in the school building at all times. It provides a kind of a single point of entry, which is shown in these plans. These are actual plans taken from school systems in Maryland, 2 different models. The lower left, you see that the office is off of the vestibule. The person is buzzed in at the exterior door. They're in the vestibule. They then enter the office where they go through the card reader process, and if everything clears, then they go into the school. In the second model, the office might be remote from the vestibule, so there's a window there, something like a check-in, a ticket window, and the visitor will be buzzed in. Someone will come to the window. That will be where the card reading process takes place, and if everything clears, then they're buzzed into the building. The second of these would apply at the moment to the configuration you have at Broadford Elementary School and Southern Middle School, for instance. The second set of capital projects is for disruptive behavior. This is driven by the increasing incidence of trauma-related disruptive behaviors, which are having an impact on the school environment, both for the children who are going through the incident as well as for children in the regular programs. This would involve building new spaces or fitting up existing spaces within the schools. The spaces would be identified in consultation with the principals, counselors, and staff of the receiving schools. Projects would not necessarily be needed in every school. These projects would be undertaken through the operating budget. The idea is to provide a dedicated space for de-escalation. It's safe, it's controlled, it's calming. And within these spaces, there usually is a defined small calming space, which would be under adult supervision all the time. The goal is to return the student to the regular classroom as quickly as possible. This does not involve seclusion or restraint, except under emergency conditions. Third, we have building systems, and I think these pretty much speak for themselves. Aging school system, you have many building systems that need to be upgraded to extend the useful life of the building, to improve the learning environment, the comfort, but also issues like lighting at desk level, air quality, temperature control, moisture penetration, and so forth. By doing these projects, you reduce the cost of operations, you improve your energy management and your water management, their environmental benefits, and at the same time, your staff would then be freed up to attend to the more urgent issues in the older facilities. So it's a more efficient use of staff time. And the list of projects starts with the Southern High School building envelope, which has been entered into the FY 2021 Capital Improvement Program and has received a favorable response from the IEC staff, and hopefully will receive a favorable response from the Interagency Commission day after tomorrow as well. And then further projects have been identified by Ms. Baker's staff and prioritized. Clearly the list has to be re-examined constantly to see new projects are likely to emerge. The scope of projects that is in the list is likely to change simply because of age. The Friendsville Elementary School ceiling has been partially replaced already using operating funds. That will continue. And we're recommending no major building system in FY 2025. And that has to do with the schedule of funding for the major project, the Southern Middle School Broadford project, if that is the direction the board takes. We're not saying that is the direction they'll take, but if that is the direction, then you have to look at the overall funding. Most of these projects will require professional architectural engineering services. Small projects will continue in all of the schools through the operating budget, just as they are being carried out now. Then the fourth category are the open space classrooms, particularly Grantsville and Friendsville Elementary School. The idea is to enclose the open spaces to create conventional instructional spaces. These projects have been received overwhelming support where they've been implemented by teachers, and what we hear is that it helps the teacher, it helps in terms of teacher morale, teacher performance, teacher retention. It helps students. There's less distraction. Student academic achievement improves. Behavior issues are mitigated. It has a lot to do with acoustics. We as adults sometimes have problems in these open space classrooms paying attention to what's being said. You can hardly imagine what it's like for an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old in some of these very resonant open space classrooms. The committee is recommending 4 two-classroom pods at Grantsville and 4 two-classroom pods at Friendsville Elementary School, stretched out over a number of years. There are other schools that have open space. Broadford Elementary and Southern Middle School would be addressed in some form or other at the decision point when the scope of those projects is defined. And then for Swan Meadow, please see the recommendation that comes a bit later. The FY 2021 Capital Improvement Program, the committee deferred to the superintendent to develop the request for the state and the local funding for FY 2021, but recommended that the categories shown here be included. The priorities would be identified by the superintendent and the funding amounts and the scope. Security vestibules, and I understand that they will be undertaken through the Safe Schools Grant Program, a state program that's dedicated to school security, rather than through the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program. Disruptive behavior is being undertaken through the operating budget, and these spaces are in support of training and staffing that the superintendent is already putting in place. Building systems, the Southern High School building envelope I've mentioned through the capital program. Open space pod enclosure, the committee did recommend planning approval be requested in FY 2021. I don't believe that it did enter the CIP. Now, for a project like that, you can request planning approval and funding in the same year. So if it is deferred to FY 2022, you won't lose an awful lot of time. And then the Southern Middle Broadford, the feasibility study to launch that process, which I understand was also included in the board's approved capital improvement program. The recent history is that the board has made relatively small requests to the state outside of the large Southern Middle School renovation project, which was denied by the state because it did not receive local support. So of the last 10 years, FY 2011 through 2020, no application was made in 4 years. The total amount of funds that was approved by the state was only 16% of the amount that was requested. And the main reason for that was because of the denial of the Southern Middle School renovation project. So hopefully the response now with well-conceived projects that fall under a strategic plan now and in the future will be more favorable by the state. The question of a single high school was taken up by the committee, and the committee was well aware that the board did put that issue to the side, I believe about a year ago, but the committee felt it was important to consider it. And I've included direct quotes from the recommendation here because I think this is so important. This is clearly a very controversial issue in Garrett County. First, the committee takes no position on the merits of a single high school, but it does recommend that the board initiate a process for a full public examination of the concept by establishing a committee or a work group which would study all the issues associated with this very complex process. And they recommend that the composition of this committee or this work group should reflect the same kind of community diversity as the board established in the Strategic Facilities Committee, so that all voices are heard in this process of developing the thoughts about a single high school. The need for this is justified by the underutilization of the two high schools, and this has educational and operational impacts. The rationale is instructional. A larger student body will support more course offerings. It'll provide more extracurricular activities. It'll equalize educational opportunities from north to south, which are equal now, except I think in CTE with the culinary arts. It'll improve efficiencies, eliminating some of the instructional duplication, which means then you can have a more diversified set of educational offerings. So there are educational benefits that I believe come from this. Financially, it's unclear. The literature that was studied by one of the subcommittees was inconclusive about whether there are financial benefits to be gained from this kind of consolidation or not. I think it would take a much more detailed study, particularly of transportation impacts, to understand whether there were financial benefits. There could be some financial benefits in terms of textbooks, CTE equipment, reduced overall footprint. You would have a smaller footprint, so that by itself would be more efficient. Some costs may increase. Transportation may increase. And there's no question that this will involve a very large capital outlay. So it has to be done very thoughtfully. There are issues to study: the educational program, the experience of other school systems that have done this. Allegheny County, your neighbor to the east, has done this. Carroll County has done this. I believe Preston High School in West Virginia has also done this. There are other examples. The community's wishes and needs, the location of the site, career and technology education, whether it should be included in the comprehensive school, whether it should be separate, transportation impacts, and of course the finance impacts. This is a suggested schedule only. To move forward with this, a committee would investigate the educational dimension, possibly developing an educational specification at some level of detail, then followed by a feasibility study looking at various sites and various scopes. Recommendations would be made to the board, and then I've highlighted board decision on this feasibility, the scope, the site, and so forth would be made according to this schedule in about mid-2024. And then that would be followed by design, construction, and occupancy. Now I want to stress that in a schedule like this, there are many no-go, no-go points that the committee might decide that it simply is not worth pursuing, and make that recommendation to the board without even getting involved in developing an educational specification. Or it could go through educational specification and say, no, it's not feasible, or yes, it is feasible. So there are many decision points within a process like this, but hopefully it does lead to informed decisions about this major issue. And then that brings us to the Southern Middle School, Broadford Elementary School project and related actions. And I think there's no question that this was the most difficult, most controversial issue that the committee faced. There are ripple effects from any decisions that are made about this project, and other decisions will affect this project, and I'll try and clarify that. The recommendation of the committee is pending provision by the Board of County Commissioners of a maximum budget figure for the Garrett County Public Schools capital program, then develop an educational specification and a feasibility study. So the first step is there has to be clarification about what the funding envelope is. How much funding can the commissioners provide to the Board of Education to support capital projects, not just this project, but all capital projects. From that, it would be possible to estimate the state match, and that gives you a total picture of what can be done. But before launching into the very intensive effort of developing an educational specification, and then the expensive effort of doing a feasibility study, roughly $100,000 to $140,000, there should be some idea about whether this concept will be supported by the funding that can be provided by the commissioners. So this is a pending decision, and I understand that discussions are underway on that issue. The need is driven, first of all, by this roof project. That's the trigger. We estimate $2.5 million. I'm told by your staff that they can only patch for so much longer before it has to be replaced. But if you replace that roof, first of all, a large investment, there would be many educational deficiencies at Broadford Elementary School that would not be addressed. The open space classrooms, other building systems that need to be looked at, the location of the administration area, the security vestibule, relocatable classrooms. The approximate cost, and this cost was developed initially by the Facilities Department in February of 2018, and then adding to it total project costs, including design, contingencies, and construction escalation, comes to about $20.1 million to do a partial renovation of Broadford. And Southern Middle School also has many deficiencies. Interior configuration, the very, frankly, poorly done enclosure of classrooms that resulted in that strange interior configuration, plus some open spaces that still remain, science and technology spaces that need to be upgraded, the location of the administration area and building systems. And a lot of work has been done in recent years, I understand that. But the approximate cost to partially renovate, taking into account those systems that have been improved, would be another $17.5 million. So you put these two together, and you would end up with about 156,000 square feet of instructional space, which is quite a bit more than you actually need for a elementary school and a middle school. And you would be spending approximately a combined $37.6 million if this was done in the summer of 2020. Of course, it's not going to be done in the summer of 2020 because of design and so forth, escalating out to the summer of 2024, which is about when a major project could begin after you go through all the approval processes, design, and so forth. It'd be about $44 million. Now, there are a lot of assumptions in here, and they are outlined in Supplement 2. And we can obviously talk about those if you'd like to. The proposal is to try and achieve best value, not necessarily least cost, but best value through this process. And so looking at the project, the size of the project will depend first on the educational program that's developed, second on the number of students it has to house, and then also on the available funding, which will define some of the scope. Three interacting factors. My organization studied 6 redistricting and grade reconfiguration options, and this was for a renovation addition option. Now this committee is not recommending renovation addition, but we had to take one option and study it. And the purpose of that study was to see how sensitive is the total cost to the enrollment under various redistricting or grade band reconfiguration options. All the options assume a mid-2024 start of construction, and I've provided 3 options here. With no change in student assignments, you'd be housing about 982 students. The total size would be about 123,000 square feet, and the cost would be about 38 to 39 million. Now take into account that the 123,000 square feet assumes that there would be some joint use spaces, so you could reduce the total footprint. It's not as if you would have to build completely separate elementary and middle, but there are scheduling issues, there are all kinds of issues that are involved in that, of how you use joint use spaces. These would be the most expensive spaces, usually the high bay, long span spaces, like the gymnasium, the cafeteria, possibly some administration spaces. That's where the Educational Specification Committee would have to do a very careful job of defining which spaces might be appropriate. With a simple redistricting of students from the south to the north, total enrollment would be reduced to 892, give or take, about 113,000 square feet, about 33 million. So you've shaved off about $6 million. With a simple redistricting plus a grade band reconfiguration, where your 8th grade would be housed in Southern High School and your 5th grade from the elementary schools would move into Southern Middle School, enrollment would be reduced to 843 students, about 110,000 square feet, and about $31 million. Compare that to the $44 million for partial renovation of the two schools. The big difference here is really the amount of square footage that has to be renovated, 156,000 square feet versus, let's say, 123,000 or 110,000. That's where you can achieve great efficiencies through this process. Now, looking at the best value question, the Educational Specification Committee, we're recommending it would be composed of principals and educators, central office staff, parents, community leaders, and also experts from Maryland State Department of Education who can point to other projects that have been done in the state of Maryland for comparables and comparison. The scope would look at the projected student enrollments and the design capacity that would emerge from that. The number of instructional spaces and support spaces, outdoor facilities, the relationship the spaces have to one another, critical issues of access, circulation, traffic movement on site, and community use space. And the types of issues that they would be looking at. What's the program, the educational program? What does Garrett County Public Schools, what does the Board of Education want the educational program to be for this facility? Should the schools be consolidated for efficiency? And when I say consolidated, what I mean is two schools under one roof. I do not mean consolidated as a K-8 or anything like that. And the word consolidated probably is not the right word to use here, and I apologize for that. It's really a physical consolidation for efficiency. And how do you ensure that different age groups do not mix inappropriately, a key concern that the community has? On that question related, are there facilities that can be used jointly? And should community use space be included? The state does support community use space. So through this process, the Educational Specification Committee will define possible options. They could eliminate certain options as simply being unfeasible or not desirable and focus on a handful of remaining options. With that, you would be led to the feasibility study. The feasibility study would look at the major planning options which are defined by the educational specification. And this is just a range of the possible options. At the very low end is what we might call targeted renovations. Upgrade the building system, obviously the roof, and in some of the building systems, focus on a few specific instructional areas, for instance, open space, pod enclosure, the administration area, and call it a day. And that can be very effective. There are two projects in Kent County underway right now that are doing exactly that. It's a way to stretch the budget and still achieve good results within a school. At the upper end is complete replacement of both facilities, and then the decision would have to be made. Does that mean replacement as two separate facilities, or for the sake of efficiency, do you somehow join the two facilities together? Two schools separate as schools, but under one roof. And there are models of that around the state. And there are a range of options in between. The feasibility study would be carried out by a third party. It involves architectural engineering analysis. It should be noted that the committee does not take a position on any one of these options, these planning options. That has to be very clear. This is only a process that's being proposed that would lead to informed decisions by the Board of Education. And all of the impacts would be examined for each of the options: educational program impacts, enrollment options, transportation, and down the list. And I should mention that if there's any discussion about abandoning or demolition of a school, COMAR does actually require a feasibility study be carried out by the Board of Education. So this would be a state requirement, in fact, under any option other than one of simply retaining the existing facilities. Trying to grapple with this and express it to ourselves, explain it to ourselves, and then think about how to explain it to the world was a great challenge, I have to say. So hopefully this chart provides some help. At the top of the chart, you'll see two steps. One is the development of the educational specification in the early part of calendar 2020, followed by the feasibility study in the second half of 2020. That leads to a decision point, which I've circled in red. It has a red star. This is when the board, we're saying February 2021, let's just say early 2021, would make its decision based on the information it has from the Educational Specification Committee and the feasibility study, which would also give you the cost projections for construction, project costs, life cycle costs, make the decision. And the fundamental decision is, Do you retain the two facilities and make improvements as needed, or do you undertake a larger project in some form or other, renovation, addition, replacement? There are the range of options here. If you retain the two facilities, follow the gold arrows down, then you have some other choices that have to be made. You obviously have to replace the roof at Broadford, you have the entryway, the security vestibule, the administration area, the open space classrooms, specific projects that really should be undertaken. And the same thing at Southern Middle School. If you choose the larger project, the major project, then at the top there is a schedule that outlines the process for planning, defining the scope more exactly. The approval process from the state. A project of that scope will require separate planning approval from the state of Maryland. That would be followed by design, about a 2-year design process. Another approval for funding by the state of Maryland, followed by construction, and based on the scope of and the construction schedule for the Easton Elementary School, which is about the kind of size we're talking about in terms of number of students, complexity of site operations, and so forth, you can be looking easily at 1.5 to 2 years of construction through to final demolition of the existing building, if that is the option that's chosen, of course. Okay. With that would have to be made decisions about redistricting and grade band reconfiguration, because those decisions will affect the student enrollment at Broadford Southern Middle School, which in turn affects the costs to get the project to fit within any funding envelope that is provided by the Board of County Commissioners. So an initial process of vetting the redistricting options with the community, and then as construction approaches, the final decisions would have to be made, and COMAR defines a process that has to be gone through, including the opportunity for appeal to the State Board of Education. As I said, trying to express this is quite difficult, and so I developed a Venn diagram which tries to suggest how these three factors interact with one another. The scope of the project, which has to do with the academic program and the enrollment, the funding capacity, which is provided by the Board of County Commissioners, and then the enrollments, and that is defined by the redistricting or grade band reconfiguration or school closure decisions that are made. Out of that will come a solution for the Broadford Southern Middle School situation. And from that, then decisions can be made about these more specific projects, Head Start, schools with multiple educational space and building deficiencies, which I'll talk about. I don't think I need to talk more about redistricting or grade band reconfiguration. The interaction, I think, is fairly clear, but what is important is to understand this does have a consequence for other projects, that right now, it would be desirable on its own merits for Head Start program to be relocated from the Dennett Road facility to the elementary schools. It's seen that this is beneficial for young children to be in the school where they will eventually be students. It helps in terms of coordination, their own development, behavior issues can be identified. But right now there's no space for it in the southern elementary schools. Space could become available through redistricting and or grade band reconfiguration. That decision should be made in tandem with the decision about the scope of the Southern Middle School Broadford project. These go together. For schools that have multiple educational space deficiencies, Broadford Elementary School and Southern Middle School, clearly, I've already mentioned those deficiencies, and they would be addressed through this process that we're talking about. The two other schools are Crellin Elementary School and Swan Meadow Elementary School. These are true community schools. I've visited, I've talked to the principals, I've talked to community members. We heard about this through community input. We know these are beloved community schools. They are also schools that need a large amount of investment, frankly, on building systems, ADA issues, resource rooms, spaces for music and art, potential overcrowding at Crellin Elementary School. Right now, these are schools that are very small. A small school, many of these problems can be accommodated by the principal, and the ingenuity and innovation that's shown at these schools is really, I think, quite wonderful. These are problems that would be overwhelming in a larger school. For instance, acoustics in open space classroom. In a small group of students, it's not a problem. A large number of students, it's a very serious problem. So the board really has to decide, Is it going to invest in these schools, which means it is going to keep them, or are these schools going to be taken out of the inventory? It is a fundamental decision, but I think that you cannot simply let these schools continue because the deficiencies are only going to increase over time. Building conditions, building systems, and the space deficiencies at the schools. But the decisions really do have to be taken in conjunction with the other decisions, and that's why the committee is recommending deferral of the decisions on those two schools until the decision is made in regard to the Southern Middle School, Broadford Elementary School. That is very much the key to a number of other issues. Relocation of the Board of Education office. There are a number of different possibilities, but one of them is relocate the board offices to Dennett Road. There would be some advantages to that in terms of greater efficiency of operations, communication between various departments of the school system, but there's no space there now. Space would be available if Head Start moved out. Head Start can't move out until space is available in the Southern Elementary schools, which in turn depends on redistricting and grade band reconfiguration. So you see there's a kind of a domino effect here. There are other considerations, other spaces that could be considered, and I think there are some efficiencies that could be gained, the avoidance of the lease payment, the definite avoidance of the capital improvements you're going to have to make at the Second Street facility. I understand that the roof and the fire alarm are pending, and I think there are other deficiencies as well. And under your triple net lease, the board is responsible for those improvements, which are going to be very costly. And then the committee would like the board to consider reopening Dennett Road facility as an elementary school. And the purpose of that would be to relieve overcrowding in the southern area elementary schools. I think this needs a great deal of study. Central office functions at Dennett Road would have to be relocated into some other area, other facility. There would be renovation costs actually to move the elementary school into Dennett Road as well as to relocate the central office functions. So I think it does require a great deal of study. And then the committee developed funding recommendations, adjusting the state-local capital funding formula. Hopefully that will be something undertaken in the next legislative session to take account of special conditions that Garrett County faces due to topography, the climate here, the fact that you host Deep Creek Lake and the summer influx that doubles the population here with all the traffic congestion issues and so forth. Relocation of the Board of Education offices, it has efficiency implications, but it also has the possibility of avoided lease can support some capital debt. Investigating methods to increase local funding for school construction projects. This is undoubtedly going to be controversial, in either increasing the property tax or avoiding expenses, and really that comes down to the possibility of a school closure. But school closure also does carry other consequences. Efficiency of operations improve, more effective use of instructional time, especially of the specialists, better utilization of space, and possibly more state funding for projects. So that has to be studied in considerable detail. Identify joint board and county functions. This falls under streamlining. I understand information technologies are already shared. There might be other functions like finance and personnel that could be shared. And then identifying joint users for the underutilized spaces, if that works out, if there are eligible users. That helps to reduce the state-rated capacity, and there's a formal process you can go through to actually reduce state-rated capacity through that occupancy, but it also helps in developing synergies, mentoring opportunities, possibilities of students learning from the people who occupy the building and those people learning from the students, and we've seen how that works around the state. What I'm showing here, this rather dense and complex graphic, is only a model at a much more readable scale. This is a 6-year plan. This is the kind of plan that school systems develop, in fact, looking at all the projects, looking at the fiscal years, looking at the state and local division of funding, breaking it down into the construction costs and the project development costs for every project, looking at the totals. And an instrument like this, it is a model, which means it has to be worked on, it has to be adjusted, it's dynamic. But a model like this is extraordinarily useful as a means of communication, to the funding entities, the state, and particularly the local government, as well as to the community. It tells them what to expect, where the big surges of funding are going to be needed, how to prepare for that, how, if projects are delayed, then how does that affect the project. The decision points, this is more complex than most of them because it involves that decision point, but this is the kind of instrument that can be developed. So in conclusion, I'd just like to state that to keep the existing configuration is a choice. It's a choice that involves consequences in terms of inequities between North and South, inefficiency of operations, a gradually declining physical plant, and potential reduction of state funding. The strategic plan that has been developed by this committee does offer an alternative. It presents a number of feasible projects. These are practical projects that can be undertaken as we talk over the next few years. They'll have immediate impact in terms of safety, educational programs, improving building conditions, but then also outlining a process that will lead, we would say by early 2021, to an informed decision about the major project, the Southern Middle School Broadford Elementary School project, and then everything that's tied into that in terms of the student assignments, grade band reconfigurations, school closures, the impact it'll have on other programs like Head Start, disruptive behavior programs, and even building systems. And so with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Did you do any cost estimate projecting out 10 years what a central high school would cost?
I think I do have that in the study.
I think it was in the $70 million range.
If I can find that page. Hold on a second here. Let's see, where is that located? We've got a table of contents to find that, if you don't mind. Oh, yeah. Let's see, single high school, page 5. I can't find it right now, but I believe that when I did a calculation, it was in the order of about $89 million. Now that assumed inclusion of career tech, because that involves a larger square footage per student. And discussion with Dr. Valver, we assumed, and again it's assumption, that about 1/3 of the students would be in career tech at any particular time. So you would need spaces both for those students in the regular classroom and in the career tech. Right?
That number would incorporate the building only? It doesn't incorporate land purchase?
No, that's total. No, it does not include acquisition.
Right.
It does include site improvement costs, just as a standard percentage figure.
Would
for
not
new construction.
include athletic facilities,
Oh, yes.
those sorts of things?
It includes, anything that's needed in the way of site improvements, grading, stormwater management, athletic facilities, parking. It's all included in a 19% figure, which is added to the basic cost, the vertical construction cost. Now that's escalated out to at 4% per year to the beginning of construction. So the escalation figure, of course, could vary tremendously, depending on the economy and also local economy, which is, you haven't had a project of that size here. So we don't know how the construction market would respond to this particular locale. Bidding has been rather difficult, as you probably know, in Allegheny County, with contractors coming from a considerable distance to be able to handle a project like the recent high school that was constructed. I'll try and find that figure for you. I know it's in here somewhere, but I just can't find it. 59. Thank you. There it is. Yeah, more than 80 million. And I think that's probably conservative, frankly.
And I remember when I was reading it, it didn't have the CTE part in it. It said that it was figured without.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Without that. So
Right.
it's that amount without the CTE. which CTE is a very big program for us, so there'd be no way we'd want to give that up. So
Right.
I think it would be good if we had a figure on that that was realistic to the county.
Well, one of the questions there is, would the CTE be included within that facility, or would it be at other locations in the state or in the county? There are models for both. So again, that was an assumption.
And when we, in the past, the decision has been to put it into the school.
Okay.
I think that we found that works for us successfully because of the busing, that it would, to take, students to another facility, you have additional transportation cost.
I can recalculate that,
Thank you.
and I'll get that figure to you. Right.
The idea of reopening Dennett Road as a elementary school is interesting, but I don't, there's not a lot of, wouldn't that take extensive redistricting, and where would the children come from that go to that elementary school as opposed to Broadford or Yoklades or Crellin or, it's an idea, but I think it would need a lot more study in the future for us to even consider that.
The committee did not discuss this particular recommendation extensively. So it's just in there to begin the discussion, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree with the statement of the Dennett Road Elementary School being reopened as an elementary school. I would agree with you because it does not necessarily, from the way I view it, and of course it would need some more studying, solve a lot of issues because it's not necessarily serving a separate community than Broadford, considering the school is less than 5 minutes away from Broadford Elementary. And also, I think it would be more beneficial to complete the Broadford Elementary and Southern Middle project. I know it's probably not an either or, but if it came down to it, the Southern Middle School and Broadford Elementary renovation project would tend to take precedence over reopening Dennett Road as an elementary school, considering that we could make the Broadford Elementary School larger to fix the capacity issue and also fix the problems with the other problems with the school. So that would just be my 2 cents.
And there's no question that the renovation cost for Dennett Road would draw funds away from other projects. So that would be a decision that had to be made too.
Charlotte?
As I went over the project for Broadford and Southern Middle, I did notice that as we added other things like the reconfiguration of the grade levels, also the changing of the boundaries and things like that, it seemed like to save money, we were doing these other things that have also been talked about in the report. And at the end, or at the as far as money is something that we are going to have a struggle with on this. But we were cutting back to, you got the school to 100% full. That was what, that's what's in the report. And that's because of these, but these other things have to go on to even be able to possibly afford it, that we've, tried to stay away from. So I see, in some ways, I see us with the brand new school, and this is something we went up against last time we closed schools. We're gonna have a brand new school, but it's going to be crowded. So I think the money figure that we're looking at on that is unrealistic.
And you're correct.
If I could speak to that, I think that went to the question of the committee on October 17th did go to the commissioners to try to get some guidance as far as the number and a figure. So the committee did not have a figure to work with because of the continued discussions on that. So absent a figure, the committee was charged to do what they thought they would be options. But the way I understand it as well is the committee didn't take a position. It's just offering a range of options to be studied.
That's correct. And actually, the Educational Specification Committee will come up with other options to be studied. This was really a way of sort of just checking to see how sensitive was the cost issue to enrollments. And you're right, it did assume 100% occupancy. Now, in a situation where enrollments are flat or possibly declining, that assumption is more or less okay, but the Educational Specification Committee might say, no, we need to design for, let's say, 95% anticipated, which means we'd be building excess capacity in. That's what would often be done through an educational specification. So that I had to make certain assumptions just to get to kind of a basic model to work with so that each of the tests were addressing the same model, right? So there are a lot of assumptions that could be different.
Yes.
Yeah. But I think the student member is correct that you would want to design this so that you are sure that it wouldn't be overcrowded.
Right.
And so that you could relieve any possible overcrowding in the other schools in the southern area. Now, one way to do that is simply build a much larger school, but then you run up against the sort of maximum size of, let's say, the elementary school and middle school. You know, you don't want to just make it as big as it needs to be simply to address overcrowding in other schools, if that meant that you might have an elementary school of over 1,000 students.
Right. One thing that caught my, made me think there is that we're looking at if we fix both schools as they stand now.
Yep.
This is the dollar figure, but if we come over here and build this new school, then this is the dollar figure, which is a lower dollar figure, but you're also getting less space,
Yes.
less, right. So those type of things need to be looked at because you can't look at those alone.
Right. But the less space translates to greater efficiency over the next 50 years. The total, because you're heating, cooling, maintaining less space. The cost of ownership is, over the life of the building, is actually far greater than the cost of construction. Some people estimate that it could be as much as 4 times as great as the cost of construction. The other thing that has to be taken into account is, do you build capacity while you have capacity in basically the same neighborhood available? You've got mothballed space at Southern High School. How can that be used? And that space is at a reduced operational cost because it's mothballed, but there still is a cost associated with it. And can you reduce the very, very large cost of construction by intelligently using that mothballed space, but addressing all the issues? And we know that there are many, many issues that are involved in that kind of use of space. Whether you're considering for central office, whether you're considering for student, for instruction. It's a very difficult set of questions. But, you know, the community facing a very expensive project, because no matter how you cut it, it will be an expensive project, could say, but you've got this space, you know, a mile away, 2 miles away. You know, why not use that space? And I think that's a good question. It has to be addressed. That's where these options come in, looking at the various options.
Yeah, I personally really like the way the report was designed and the options that it lays out for us. I think it's a really good framework for the board to make decisions in the future looking at this planning document. I think really one of the key recommendations is this, number one, the joint planning group that looks at coordination of the capital improvement project. I think what we're talking about money-wise here is going to be really tough to do unless we have some movement at the state level and changing funding formulas. Yep. Or we discover a new way of doing things at the state, maybe special projects for small rural areas or things like that. I think that's something that we need to coordinate with the county government and with the businesses in Garrett County, and I think this is a really key proposal. Number one, it'll improve communication among all parties in Garrett County, and I think it'll help us move forward with actually coming up with the funds that we need to do some of these things. But some of these decisions are really tough because there's just not the money to do it. And until we find another way, which I think we can work on, but it's going to be difficult.
Yes, understand. Very difficult.
Mike?
I would like to thank you for this report. I read it all, which I believe all of us board members did. I read it word for word. It took, we don't want to say how long, it's 104 pages. And I've got notes on about every page and highlighted, but I'll try to go over a few things that I got from it. One thing is about the Broadford roof. We say how bad a shape it is. And even if the project would go forward to put Southern Middle and Broadford together, according to this, it might be 7 years till it would be done. So the question here is, today, would Broadford roof last for 7 more years?
It'll be a stretch, and from what I understand, it would be tough. There are ways that you can extend a roof. They do come with cost beyond just sort of simple patching. But those are the kinds of tough decisions that are going to have to be made. I don't think there's a way that you can avoid that. Now, if you phase this project, I mean, let's just say, for the purpose of discussion, you do a renovation addition option. You do it in phases so that you can relocate the Broadford students as quickly as possible out of that facility to begin the demolition process, right? But that's where you have to work out a phasing diagram to say, and this is where the space at Southern High School could actually help you as temporary space, to move students out of, let's say, Southern Middle School while it's being renovated. That area that's being renovated becomes the elementary school. The elementary school kids move in from Broadford. That facility is vacated as quickly as it can be, and then the roof is no longer an issue because there's nobody in the building. But that's only under that renovation addition model, right? Under other models, you'd have to work out different phasing.
And a lot of things, there's a lot of different options. One thing showed, I really read the wording. If you put Broadford into Southern Middle, you made 2 schools under 1 roof. But then it says make an 8th grade academy, take all the 8th grade students to Southern High. Then it has redistrict some kids. Then another part of it said take 5th grade from Crellin, 5th grade from York Glade, and put in. And then part of it said add space for Head Start. One section I got out of this said possibly take the special ed department from York Glade, put that central special ed, southern in the county, into Broadford. So there's so many changes here that would impact so many students in so many different schools.
That's right.
So it's like you would be supposedly making the school the footage smaller, relocating kids, but then you're actually building onto the building to house, to make it larger, I would say. And then it had in here the community space. We'd have to offer space for community space.
You don't have to, but it is an option, and the communities use the facilities, and the state does participate, so that's always a decision that has to be made. It does come with an additional cost for the local government, there's no question about it, but there's a benefit. So those would be some of the decisions that would have to be made along the way. I mean, to take those sort of one by one. The redistricting could be done by itself, right? That's using capacity in the northern part, in the northern elementary schools, which is available now. And that can be done at relatively low cost. I understand that you would not have to add additional routes. You'd have to change the routes, but you wouldn't have to add staff to do that. That's not, it's obviously difficult in detail, but it can be done conceptually, right? You can do redistricting in combination with grade band reconfiguration. And with the grade band reconfiguration, the idea was that you would use that space at Southern High School for an 8th grade academy. We have talked to the principal there, and she does feel that that is feasible to do. But concurrent with that, you would be moving the 5th graders from Crellin, York Glade, and Broadford into Southern Middle School. So you would now have a different grade configuration. It would be pre-K to 4 for elementary. It would be 5 to 7 for middle. You would have a separate 8th grade academy, and then you would have 9 through 12 for your high schools. One of the questions the board would have to confront if it decided to do that is, do you do the same thing in the north? For the sake of kind of making sure that things are the same for students that go through the system. Another hard choice. On the special ed, that was only brought up because if you're designing a school, this is a purpose-built school, is at a better location for special ed because it's more central to the county. You could design it from the very beginning with the needs of those students in mind, rather than coming into a facility and sort of adapting it. And it would free up more space at Yacht Glades so that with redistricting or grade band reconfiguration or some combination, you could have not only reduction of the overcrowding, but also now the music and art at Yacht Glades could be restored to the spaces that were designed for them. Now you might have space to move Head Start in there. So you see how these things are interconnected. You know?
And you
That's
said,
a difficulty.
I remember reading this too, something you just said, that Broadford would be more central in the southern end of the county, especially it was there, but actually Yacht Glade and Broadford are about 2 miles apart, so it's not a big difference when I read that. Something else I seen there too, another thing it said possibly for Crellin, is if you put Broadford into Southern Middle, you would then possibly take the portables that are located at Broadford and take them to Crellin. Is that correct?
Now that could be a short-term solution for Crellin, because you could, I understand there could be 4 relocatables at Broadford that might be freed up. The 2 relocatable classrooms at Crellin are quite old and really getting to the end of their life. So replace those and gain, you have substitution of 2 spaces, plus you have 2 additional spaces, which provides program capacity for Crellin. Now, working it out where that goes on the site, all of that has to be done in detail. But that would be a short-term effort. I don't think anybody wants to live in relocatables for 30 years if they can possibly help it. So that would provide some relief. But a longer-term sort of idea for Crellin, if you retain that school, is that there are a number of facility improvements that have to be made, building systems that need to be upgraded. There is the need for permanent expansion there for capacity purposes as well as for programmatic reasons. Right? So I think that has to be looked at. The short term is possibly remove the relocatables at fairly small cost, relatively small cost, but the longer term idea is to provide permanent improvements for the facility.
For Crellin.
For Crellin, right. But again, that decision hinges on these other decisions.
Right. Just, I've read different things in here, different scenarios, but
Yep.
the public wouldn't have maybe seen all this to understand. I think it's on the website for view, but not everybody might have viewed it.
It's very difficult because, to outline every possible combination of outcomes here, depending on, let's say, what is decided for Southern Middle School and Broadford Elementary School, would be voluminous. And I don't think we could do it, to run through all the various permutations, including the redistricting, grade band reconfiguration options. So we had to be selective about thinking about what are the factors that we're looking at here and how do those factors interact. But this is where the Educational Specification Committee, it really begins with the educational program. What kind of program do you want to have for the elementary school, for the middle school? That defines a number of spaces. Is it feasible within the funding envelope to carry out those spaces? If not, what do you have to do? Enrollment is definitely a factor.
Right.
Do you reduce the number of classrooms? That means a reduction in the number of students. How do you do that? Those are the kinds of intersecting questions here.
And we're talking about Broadford and Southern Middle. Something else I seen on there was could possibly fix Broadford, fix Southern Middle, leave them like they are, or put 2 schools in one. But another thing in here said, or build a whole new school at a location that the board owns. That kind of surprised me, I guess.
Well, that could be the same site that they're on now.
Right, but that
That's
was
right.
another wording in there. And then for the one possibly moving central office to a different location, it had named different places.
Yeah.
I believe it was what? Southern High, it said Dennett Road Facility, and this is one I never thought of. It had mentioned Garrett College on there. On the high school, some things that said that they lacked was what, an auditorium, and I guess that would probably be, you're referring to the Performing Arts Center that we're going to be getting at the college, like an auditorium that they could go and use. Would that be what that would be in reference to, probably, would you say?
You mean for the high school?
Yes, the high schools.
Well, the high school design these days typically includes an auditorium. Now, if there's a way that you can find space that is convenient, that you can use for those functions, that's terrific. The Barbara Ingram School in Hagerstown, Performing Arts, is all instructional space. They're now expanding it to include regular classrooms, but the Performing Arts space is actually a municipal theater, which is 2 doors up. Mm-hmm. And so the students actually simply go outside and they go into that space, and it's a reasonably professional space. That's a great accommodation, using an existing space without having to build a new one. So if you can find a way to get around that, and that's a very expensive space to build. Auditoriums are very expensive.
On one of the ratings, that was on there, and we was rated low, but that would be what the college will be having, that they could utilize, which we're in partnership with.
Right. And the college was brought into that because we did hear from some community members, and these were by way of emails, letters, and so forth, that there might be some possibilities there for using that space, spaces at the college for instructional programs, but also for CTE. And there already is alignment of the CTE programs, but expanding that to use that available space.
I think the point here is there's lots of options within all of these different recommendations. What this is setting out, apart from the current capital in this fiscal year and next fiscal year, which are your more immediate needs, you're not making specific recommendations. You're saying, look at these issues for most of these recommendations.
What we're recommending is a process that will lead through the Educational Specification Committee and the Educational Specification. Then that would hopefully lead to a feasibility study, which then leads to a Board of Education decision in which all of these issues are basically vetted and decisions are made about them because they're so interconnected, these decisions. I would never have thought when I came into this process that it would be this complex in Garrett County, but it is.
Additional questions?
Yeah, I had another comment. Yes, and as I was reading through the report, I realized that you felt some of the frustrations that I have felt being on this board and having to close schools and trying to figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to make it work. And I think that having options are good. And I would like to say that in looking at the report and accepting the report, we would like to thank the people that worked on your committee. Thank you, because there was a lot of work. Sometimes I felt like the focus had changed a little when we went to looking at high schools and when we also talked about saving community schools, because I mean, there were committees that got together and went out and worked on these ideas, and the board had, we already had decided that we were hoping to be able to keep the community schools. But it was good to read the information. It actually helped me think through it again and realize the reasoning behind the way I feel. And what I'm hoping, hope to be able to do as a member of this board. If the report is accepted this evening, I think the public needs to know that this is a framework. These are some ideas. This board needs to talk with more people. We need also to know where the funding, I'm a realistic person and I need to know, I mean, this report sounds great, wish we could do all this. Yes, it would fix our problems, but we are not a county with a lot of money. And we do have to have match. I mean, if the state's got the money, we've got to have the match, because we did have a plan for Southern Middle School, and it went very far, much further than we should have gone with it, but we were hoping that we'd be able to complete and move on from there. That didn't happen. So I do hope as we move forward with this that we do have guidelines And we do understand the limits of our county.
Yes.
And we work through that with this plan, hopefully.
Right. I think that one of the conclusions that we came to again and again is that there is no easy way forward. There's no simple road, that there are going to be difficult and actually painful decisions that will have to be made along the way, but hopefully by having a process in place that people will at least accept that it was objective and fair, and that the board acted with full information and didn't make arbitrary decisions, which are very consequential, but made very informed decisions. But right now, you don't have that information, the committee didn't have that information, and until you go through the process of developing the information for this major project, you won't have that information. So that's why the process is so important.
Katie?
So I just wanted to say again, I know many board members have said this. I know this report took a lot of effort, and we appreciate the time that you took to do this. I would ask, and I know you said it's a framework for ideas and different suggestions of how to go about this very complex and integral decision that the board has to make, but you gave different recommendations. Do you have a specific priority list of these recommendations that you think this one should happen first, this one should happen second, or are you just giving us ideas of how to attack our problem?
Well, the recommendation for the FY 2021 CIP was, in a way, a statement of priority, to say that it would be up to the superintendent and staff to establish the specific priorities within the capital program, because the state does require that. You have to have a 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. But we felt that all of those projects were important, including the open space pod enclosure. So they are, in a sense, those were the urgent projects. The safety issue, I don't think there's much question about the urgency related to that. Building systems clearly have to take care of those. Disruptive youth, this is a growing issue and has to be addressed. The open space pods has to be addressed. And then the feasibility study to start this process for the major project. So that, in a way, is a prioritization. But then the committee very deliberately decided that it would be the superintendent's task then to establish the specific priorities that were presented to the local government and to the state. And that has a lot to do with, management capacity, for instance. I mean, the fact, for instance, that originally the idea was to seek funding for an open space pod conversion in FY 2021, but then in discussion with staff, they said, we kind of hit our management capacity through the projects we have, so that meant deferring it, request planning approval only, and then funding the next year. So that would be a way to kind of spread it out to acknowledge the management capacity right now, the staff, available staffing.
Mr. Clefoni?
Yes, I think, as I said before, this is a wonderful plan. It's a great framework, and I personally want to thank the people on your committee that spent hours and hours and hours debating these issues. It had to be a difficult task over the last almost a year, right? And more importantly, I think, well, not more importantly, but I really was impressed with the community input that we got on this plan. Well thought out, written comments, very articulate, verbal comments at many of your meetings, and I think the overriding theme I saw in all these letters was the well-being of our children attending Garrett County schools. That came out very strongly, and I just hope that type public input continues in the future as we move through these tough decisions in the future. But very impressive letters commenting on various aspects of the plan all the way through. So I appreciate the public's input tremendously.
Thanks. Tom?
Just to reiterate, thank you, all of you that are here tonight that was on the committee. It was a lot of work and a lot of time, and we appreciate it very much because you've given us a lot of ideas. Just one thought was, one of the factors that will play a major role in the decision making by this board is, you touched on it briefly in your report, is the Kerwin Commission. And what comes out of the Kerwin Commission, once the legislative session finishes this year, could impact greatly the amount of money that we have to work with, or perhaps not work with, or what that money is tied to, and the strings are tied to dollars as they come to us. But that will have to come into play, and I think I speak for all of us in saying that, you know, we want to create a plan as soon as we can, because every day means dollars lost, to best meet the needs of our kids. But there are a lot of moving parts in creating that plan at the moment, and we're just going to have to go as those parts move and work with the commissioners. You know, we feel very strongly that we've got a good rapport with commissioners, and they understand our needs, and I think they'll do everything they can within their ability to meet the needs of the students of our county. But thank you, Dr. Lever. Great job.
Well, thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Lever. So just to reiterate, one part here is we've received certainly letters of interest on this and some input. When the board votes tonight, if we vote to approve the report and accept the report from the committee, we are not approving an expenditure of $50.6 million. We are approving the report as given to us, and then looking at the process that it takes us into, and then we'll consider those options as we come to them within the timeline. So we would be considering, you know, some of the CIP projects in the CIP, then we'd be looking at the Southern Middle Project, but we would be looking at these individually as agenda items on our board meetings. So those will be posted as we go through this and through this timeline. So there will still be public comment for when we're looking at all the options on all the different factors. That will still be an ongoing process. What this establishes is the framework, is the word we've used, to help us and guide us through that work. So I want to reiterate that tonight. Thank you, Dr. Lever. I know two committee members had signed up to speak, and so Jennifer Paul and Crystal Bowl, I'd like you to make some comments if you'd like.
Good evening. Thank you, Honorable Board of Education, administration, principals, community members, fellow parents, for giving Jen and I the opportunity to serve on this committee. I'm going to speak from my heart, and I'm a passionate mama, so excuse the passion at times. So I first want to say this was my first rodeo. This is the first time I've ever been part of an academic expedition, and I found it overwhelming, ambiguous, at times disappointing, and frustrating. This is personal. I have a child that is in 5th grade, an amazing little boy. He means everything to us, and we will protect him at all costs. Brian and I could choose to live anywhere that we would want to live. We made a decision to move home to Garrett County nearly 20 years ago because family matters to us. We love Garrett County. We believe in this county. We believe the people in this county. And we believe in community schools. In fact, my husband is an alum from Southern Garrett County Schools and would put his education up against any education of any person that he has ever gone up against in the career in which he's done very well. That is why we moved back. We moved back for family, for community, and for community schools. We have been in the Garrett County school system now for 6 years. We have had the highest highs, and we've had some very low lows as well. We're very intentional with our parenting. We are intentional in knowing how our son learns, and the environment we are choosing to put Nicholas in. Garrett Public Schools, unfortunately, I have learned through this process, there's a business aspect to it. But above all things, it's a personal aspect. We are guiding and directing our children. The parents that have skin in the game that are actually part of Garrett County Schools, I truly hope that we speak up and know what do we want for our kids' education. And I think that's one of the frustrating things of being part of this committee was I came in not truly knowing what the elected board's value, vision for our students are, as well as the administration at central office. And honestly, after going through the process, I'm more confused now than I was coming onto this committee. I can tell you without a doubt that quality education, rigorous academic schedule is important to our family. But you need to make sure that students' needs are being met to be successful. I would put many of our Garrett County teachers up against anybody in the world. I truly would. However, the very best teacher in the world cannot have classroom management over 27, 28, 29, 30 students to one teacher. I want to piggyback on that. Thank you, Mrs. Baker, for allowing the committee that Jen and I sat in on, which was the Behavioral Committee. Thank you for allowing us to do an autonomous survey to our teachers. I want to make it known, we had many teachers approach us and said, unless this survey is autonomous, meaning it cannot be tracked back to them, they would not be transparent. That comment bothered me so greatly because the bottom line, all of us serving, the Board of Ed, administration, principals, teachers, parents, I know we want what's best for our children, but in that comment and things that I've seen in being part of this process, I don't see that transparency. 3 things came out of that survey, and I hope you really do look at that survey. 3 things came from it. Number 1, our students are coming into the classroom, our actual students that are affecting, no matter what you guys decide to do, our students are coming into the classroom with high academic and high behavioral needs. Student needs cannot be met in a high student-to-teacher ratio. I don't care how dynamic and wonderful the teacher is. When you are having to take time constantly out of your day and redirect and rediscipline the same students over and over again, it is frustrating. You cannot be successful. You cannot be successful. That was one thing that the students continued to say, that the teachers said in this survey. The second thing is, it's a different kind of student that's coming into our schools today than in yesteryears, when some of your kids were in the school system. It's different. I'm in the schools. I'm not a mother just sends her kid to school and doesn't know what's going on. I'm physically in the schools, and I can assure you that it is a true statement that these kids are coming in with high needs. That needs to be addressed. Beyond the STAR program, which might I say is great, it's fantastic, but we also need to look at what our actual students are needing in the classroom. And to me, in order to accomplish those needs, a small student-to-teacher ratio is what you have to do, what you have to make that successful. It is concerning to me with this branch of options that have been presented to you all, that one of the options is this 2-in-1 concept of Broadford getting a new school, Southern Middle School being renovated. The thing that scares me about that is this. Our babies are in the care of our schools. We are trusting that what they're hearing and what they're learning is acceptable. That is not always the case that's happening. A teacher cannot have classroom control in a bigger student ratio school. They just cannot do it. It's just not possible. And the idea of elementary schools being under the same roof as a middle school just doesn't settle in my heart, and that's why I would not vote for that concept. Our kids are not only getting our information from parents, but kids are coming into school knowing far more things than they should know and teaching my kid those things. You would be appalled by some of the things that my son have come home and asked me about and learned in the classroom. It's unacceptable. So it's very concerning to me that that's an option. Not to mention there are consequences. If we choose to go this route and the numbers, I get the numbers. I see the numbers. If you redistrict, if you reband, then this is the number. But I just ask, when you're making decisions, number one, what is the vision of Garrett County Public Schools? From that vision, what are the standards that we are going to set? And then all of these recommendations can be measured up against those standards. I just ask that the process, we can try to be everything for everyone, or we can stand on what we truly believe in, what is best for our kids, what is best for our community. Many of us choose to live in Garrett County because of, it's Garrett County, it's amazing. It's an amazing community, it's an amazing network. As far as the committee goes, again, I thank you for this opportunity. I did find it ambiguous. At times I found it frustrating because many meetings were conducted via teleconference. So Dr. Lever was not physically present, nor were all committee members. I tried to do it via teleconference at times at my home, and I was so confused with who was talking. It was hard to follow the flow of discussion and opinions. So as far as a process and in going forward, that was one thing. To see someone physically, speak to them physically, is a different option than not seeing someone, and especially not seeing your leader. Also, meetings were scheduled during work hours. Many committee members, ones that I really wanted to know their thoughts, were not able to be there because they were working. So that was another point I just want to make known as a committee member. Was there anything else, Jen? You go ahead.
I would like you all to look at the big picture before we have another over $1 million project sitting on a shelf at the Board of Education like we had a couple years ago, last year. Am I correct?
I'm sorry, a $1 million project.
The renovation of Southern Middle School.
Oh,
the architectural
renovation
design.
of that was from 2014, 14. Oh, yeah, before we move into that, yeah,
So-
and then, yeah. okay.
So half of Broadford
Yeah,
Street
I thought you
is
were meaning
sitting
a
on
facilities
shelf at
plan,
the Board of
yeah.
Education. So I just want to make that known. I want you to look at the bigger picture before we need to spending unnecessary money.
Yeah, appreciate that. So yeah, I think that's one of the things, this board is committed to looking at those in process. So with all these recommendations, I think there'll be that process to go through, to consider that.
I just very quickly want to say one more thing, that it didn't settle in my heart with the name of the committee being the Strategic Facility Committee, because a facility denotes a physical building. But to me and my family, we can have the most beautiful building, and it's irrelevant unless you know what's going on inside that building. I am the proud parent of a student from Crellin Elementary School. This school has blown my husband and my expectations out of the water. We have a model in this school. They are a team, they are a family. When I drop our son off in the mornings, he is smiling, and when I pick him up in the evenings, he is excited to explain to me everything that he has learned, not to mention the inventory scores we are seeing as fruit from how they are learning at Crellin Elementary School. It is integrated learning, it is engaged learning, it is teachers having expectations and having consequences for those in the class that are not making good decisions. So to me, we can hire third-party sources, and that's fine, but we could also look at internally what we have working in our own schools and pick the brains of some of these geniuses that we have working for Garrett County Public Schools. And I'm honored to be part, and I'm grateful to be in that building. And I don't care that this says that the facilities don't meet standards. I'm there, and I can tell you how they meet standards. And as far as the facility goes, the pod that Dr. Lever just stated was outdated. My son is in that pod. It is integrated into the school. They have done a beautiful job with it. And I mean, it's bright. From the outside, you would not even know that it is a pod. So I think it's important to ask our principals and our teachers and our families and our students what they actually think about the schools that they're in, the ones that have actual skin in the game. So anyway, I was speaking off the cuff. I'm passionate. I'm grateful for all that you've given me the opportunity. If you ever have any questions, there's much more I have to say, but I know I far went beyond my time, so thank you.
Thanks. So we will, Dr. Lever, did you want to make any final comments?
I just like to address that issue about how we schedule the meetings, because I know that has come up. It was very difficult. At one of the early meetings, we tried to settle on a consistent day, say every 2 weeks, Thursday evening, Wednesday evening, if people could write it into their schedules. We couldn't do it. We couldn't find a date. So what we fell back on was a polling to try and get the maximum number of people who could come, who were available to come on an ad hoc basis, and that's why the time was, afternoon, midday, evening, as best we could. There were times when we had trouble just getting a quorum, and we had to have a quorum in order to be able to move forward. So that was just a point I'd like to make.
Thank you, Dr. Lever. This time, we'll move to public comment. Do we have a list back there? Thank you, Dr. Wilson. All right, so we have 7 individuals signed up. Our first individual is Nathaniel Rumor. And my question was answered. Okay, thank you. Spencer Slotnagel.
Good evening, Madam Superintendent, fellow board members. Thank you for allowing us to be here. I, as elected official, know what you're going through. You have tough decisions to make. It's hard things for our county as a whole, and we're in this together. I served on the advisory committee back in 13 and 14, it was back in 12 when we first started that, for looking at school closures throughout the county. It was a very difficult time for the county. That was then. We're looking today where we're at and what we're dealing with. Circumstances. What happened to me Friday night was Saturday evening was a very difficult thing because we had a Christmas celebration at the school. It was fun activities for the children. We were doing Christmas songs and having a variety of activities, and 2 little girls were 9-year-old children. And I'm like, what's wrong, girls? Why aren't you, we're having a good time? Well, one heard her mom and dad talking. They're looking to close more schools. This has been an ongoing thing year after year after year. And I know it's difficult. Well, my mom and dad told me if we do, that they're going to homeschool me. My mom and dad said, well, we'll probably have to move away. I said, you leave that up to us. We're the adults. We're going to take care of that problem. That's not your concern. Children in grade school and middle school shouldn't have to be worried about where they're going to be going to school and the overcrowding issues that we're dealing with. I commend Dr. Lever and the committee for all their countless hours they put in. Their recommendations, it's tough for what this board is going to have to face. I know you're talking about the roof at Broadford. I know Friendsville, with our limited budget, what we're dealing with. But I employ this board to please, I think as Tom said earlier, working together with the county commissioners, working together with the Chamber of Commerce, our business leaders, to see how we can work together to bring more people into this county that want to come here and bring their families here and stay here in Garrett County. You know, we have children who are homeschooled, and I know we talked about that when Mrs. Wagner was here. What can we do? Can we meet with them? How can we try to bring them into the fold? But the overcrowding, I am very concerned about that here on the southern end, and I know some of the proposals was to move some of the children to the northern end, the elementary schools, but they weren't to move them to Friendsville. And back even 4 or 5 years ago, Friendsville's population at the school was around 100 students. Right now we're at 150. We're looking down the road 5, 8, 10 years from now. What happens if accident in Grantsville are at 98%, and then they're overcrowded? So I'm just asking if you're back to moving students, Friendsville students that live in the 21531 zip code from the state police barracks down, many of those children they don't go to Friendsville Elementary School. And that years ago when that was being discussed, I asked, please consider that. Duplication of services. I can talk pretty loud, so. Duplication of services. I know Friendsville sometimes years ago had supplies that we don't need that maybe one of the other schools can do. Saturday evening I was very concerned. We're in the gymnasium, the auditorium, because the school system is on one central system. So it says 68 or 70 up in the main office. We were like at 80 degrees down in the lower part. And that's something we need to please. I mean, I know it's a big expense, but long term, I pray that the school be open for another 50 years, but it's something that we need to look at, because when we were doing the facility study, our recommendation to the advisory board 4 or 5 years ago, we were spending close to $100,000. I know we've been working with Bill Swift about putting solar arrays in. We have a company who wants to put close to 12 solar arrays at the school. If we can save $5,000 a year or any amount, $10,000, whatever we can save, it will help the county as a whole, help the Board of Education, help the county, help everyone. So it's just something that we need to please look at as well. I know we sent a recommendation out to the strategic committee when they were looking at this, because Friendsville were very happy that the children can walk from the elementary school to the museum. A block, 2 blocks away, they can come to our local library. Our librarian works very closely with them. They come over to the town hall, to the park, to our fire departments, all within walking distance. So I'm very grateful that we have a community school, and I encourage the other schools that we want to keep them together. And I know it's difficult decisions made years ago, and I went to the meetings when they closed Kitzmiller, when they closed Dennett Road, and I felt bad for the families there, and we need to try to keep that behind us and move forward. So I just thank you for what you're doing, but please have an open mind and think of the children, how it's affecting them, because their education is our primary concern. When I heard that Saturday night, I'm thinking, here we are going, it's deja vu, we're hearing this over and over again. So I asked that maybe our public relations we have, Mrs. Baker, that you can, once some of this is put out there, that, hey, we're not closing schools, we're looking to revamp the schools. I like to see some of the recommendations for Swan Meadow one there that they talked about for Friendsville, closing the schools, the walls in Grantsville, because the open concept did not work when they built those schools. We've seen that. But we have a great community in the county, but I would like to see our county continue to grow. But When you have families wanting to relocate to an area and you're saying we're going to have to either bus the children for an hour or longer, or either folks and friends who are saying in White Rock, we're going to take our children over to West Virginia schools, we'll just take them out of the school system. I don't want to see that happen. So, Charlotte, we know we went to Annapolis numerous times and over the years and met with the Lieutenant Governor. So whatever local leaders can do, I can assure you that all of the municipalities will help in any way we can. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Heather Roth.
I'm going to yield my time to Mr. Hughes.
Okay. So the board has made the decision that they will limit comments to 3 minutes as far as the yielding of time. That their preference is to just limit it to 3 minutes. So we can let Mr. Hughes go in a minute. He's next on the list. Arlene Lance. Okay. So Mr. Hughes.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Hughes. I'm the father of 2 children, one of which attends Crillon Elementary School. I'm here this evening to address the possible recommendations of school closures in the future. I've thoroughly read the recent facility recommendations written by the Strategic Facilities Committee. On the first 2 pages of this document, the committee discusses the possibility of closing Swan Meadow School and Crillon Elementary School. The committee also states that it must make decisions based on the values of the committee and the community. I emphasize the word values. Let me explain what the word value means. I'm an Army veteran. In the Army, I stood in front of our American flag, raised my right hand before God, and swore that I would defend the values of the United States of America, even if it would cost me my life. A value is something that you defend at all costs. A value is something that is never on the table of negotiation. Our small schools are of value to the people in each of our small communities, and as it is written in this document, you as well. That in itself makes the topic of closing any of our small schools null and void. I've been a learning partner in many of our small schools in Garrett County over the past 15 years. I've been able to see firsthand how much our schools mean to our community. I've been able to see how much our children enjoy being in a small school. I've seen the pride and passion that families have for the small school in their community. I've seen the staff in our small schools go above and beyond for their students. Often, they sacrifice time with their families for their community. I've noticed that teachers, principals, kitchen staff, janitorial staff know all the students on a personal basis. These are the things that make our children's education so special. To save time, I will not go into all the research that proves how much our children learn in a small school, as I'm sure that you're already aware of it. Placing our children in one larger building will take all these things away from them. Why would you ever consider taking these things away from our children? You were elected by us to defend and promote our children's education, not to hinder it. The Strategic Facilities Committee recommendation states that there are 2 reasons why you may choose to close 2 of our schools. These reasons are overcrowding and structural deficiencies. It was a decision of this board to close Dennett Road, Bloomington, and Kitzmiller Elementary Schools. This resulted in those students having to be placed in other schools in the Oakland area. According to this document, Broadford Elementary now operates at 111.9% capacity, and York Glades now operates at 96.7% capacity due to these closures. It is your fault that these schools are overcrowded. How could you ever think about punishing our children for your decisions? On page 92 of this document, the committee states that all of our schools except Northern Middle School are in need of structural repair. It specifically lists Crellin and Swan Meadow schools as in need of extensive repair. Is this not also your fault? Are you the ones who decide what maintenance is to be done to buildings? Why have you neglected such a serious issue? One recommendation made in this document is to demolish Broadford Elementary and build a larger complex to combine this school with Southern Middle School. I do believe that an extensive amount of money was just spent on Broadford Elementary School to add temporary buildings. The cost of time and manpower for this project must have been astronomical. You have had to neglect the maintenance of other school buildings in order to complete this project. Yet, Broadford is still over max capacity because you closed 3 other elementary schools, and now we have buildings in desperate need of repair because you have neglected them. Destroying this building is proof enough that you are incompetent with spending our tax dollars and that you create more problems than you solve. Is the reason that the school budget spreads so thin because you waste our money like that? Once again, how can you punish our children and their families because of your lack of competence? Also, where is the research that supports a 2-in-1 concept in which you combine a large elementary and a large middle school? I have yet to find any that supports the enhancement of our children's education. On pages 33 and 34 of the Strategic Facilities Committee document, it discusses community listening sessions and community feedback sessions held in May of this year about the future of Swan Meadow School. This section goes into detail of the overwhelming feedback that was given by the community in opposition to closing the school. I myself have seen an astonishing and indescribable amount of love and passion by that community for that school. Later in this document, on page 37, this is stated, and I quote, "The Board of Education is therefore faced with a difficult decision, whether to make a commitment to maintain the Swan Meadow School and invest the funds needed to achieve minimum facility adequacy, or to close the school with the potential loss of students from the school system." End quote. A child in his or her community should never be up for debate as if they should be kicked to the curb by their elected county officials. By making a statement such as this, you show that you have no regard for our children's education. It also shows that you have no respect for our cherished Amish and Mennonite community. Any members of this board who agree with the Strategic Facilities Committee on this section of the document have no business making decisions for our educational system and no business serving our country in their position. I know that you are aware of the remarkable and jaw-dropping achievements done at Crellin Elementary School. I've worked personally with that school ever since its backyard was a waste dump and an environmental hazard. I've had the fortune of watching its transformation from what it was to what it is today. I've always considered myself blessed to have been a part of that. Perhaps the most remarkable part of it is that they were able to do it at little cost to the district. They found the funds themselves. The accomplishments that have been made by the staff, the students, and the community of that school should be on the cover of educational magazines and written about in scholarly books. This school should be something that this board brags about throughout the state. And yet, you debate about keeping it open. When I think of this, there's only one word that comes to my mind: stupidity. One of the major factors in my decision to leave the military was so that my children would attend this school. I'm not the only one in that community who has made this type of decision. Probably the most heart-wrenching thing to think about in this situation is the lives of those small children who are not fortunate enough to live in a good, loving home. We do live in an area that is infested with poverty, drugs, and abuse. In my time spent in our schools, I've seen children who have to go home to things that are completely unimaginable. It is hard to think about the neglect that these children receive at home. There are so many of these cases in which these children's only escape is a small community school that they go to. This is the only place they can go to receive the care and nurturing that they deserve. They get this because our educators know them personally because of the small size of our schools. Do you think they could receive this type of care in a large school where they just become another face in the crowd? May God have mercy on you if you take that away from them. How dare you for even entertaining the idea of it? You would be no better than the parents that created their awful environment. It is my understanding that some of you sitting on this board chose to run for the school board because schools were closed in the past and it affected you personally. If this is true, please don't ever forget that. Remember that you are elected officials, chosen by us, the voters, to do what is best for the education of our children. Remember, they are our future. If you fail them, we will replace you with people who do care about them, and I vow right at this moment to lead the way. From what is stated in the document written by the Strategic Facilities Committee, this mess has been created by the decisions of the school board. It is now your job to do everything possible to fix the mess. Though it's not always easy, there is always a way. Closing any school and lessening the education of our children is not it. By closing a school, you will admit failure and defeat. When it comes to our children, failure and defeat are not an option. I will pray continuously that you make the correct decision and hold what is dear to us and our children close to your heart. May God bless you and guide you in your quest for answers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Beth Scott.
Beth Scott.
Hi, good evening. My name is Beth Scott. I am the mother of 4 children. Forgive me, give me a second. 3 of which are in the Garrett County Public School System, and 1 that will enter next year. Over the years, I have listened to many Board of Education meetings in person and online. I've sat through different strategic committee meetings. I've watched faces change on the Board of Education, central office staff, and even the commissioners. I'm speaking now because I can't watch this unfold and not say anything. I want to piggyback on something another parent spoke about: values. What are your values? What do you value for our children? As I sat through a couple of the Strategic Facilities Committee meetings, I was able to clearly see what I value does not align with some others do. I do not believe this is just a business, that decisions need to be made to save money or spend money that is not in the best interest of all our children. My husband and I are self-employed and often make decisions based on what makes the most sense for the business. We also happen to own a small business that happens to be a school for small children, and the way we make decisions for it looks different. Its sole purpose is for children, and our decisions for it reflect that. Shouldn't all decisions you make reflect children too? So again, I ask you, what do you value? When I read over the Strategic Facilities Committee report, I couldn't help but notice the emphasis on the benefits of community schools. The report on page S10 defines them to be small in nature and embedded in local municipalities or natural communities. These schools employ place-based strategies and seem well positioned to leverage their location, organizational structure, and connections to local community to facilitate the 4 components: integrated student supports, expanded learning, time and opportunities, family and community engagement, and collaborative leadership and practice that research suggests promotes achievement, behavioral, and attitudinal gains. I found it interesting that this was referenced from online documents of the Garrett County Public Schools, documents from the previous RISE strategic plan, school websites, and community feedback. It also goes on to list multiple findings that support using community schools as a school improvement strategy. In findings 1 through 7 on pages S12 through S15, there are multiple examples of the research supporting the success of community schools. I firmly agree and support these findings. This I value. This makes sense to me. So again, I ask you, what do you value? There are other parts of this report that do not support community schools and ensuring they thrive in our community. I believe it was the September board meeting that Mr. Paul stated that the board would not be closing any schools. Yet here we are with wide support in our community, and even in this report for community schools, and we are discussing consolidating and or closing some of our most prized community schools to achieve what? A beautiful building? If there is not money to build or renovate schools to the desired level, then maybe the level should be lowered. Just a thought. I'm not sure of any household that wouldn't love to remodel or build their dream home, but that is not the majority of our reality. You just adjust. You certainly don't make decisions that you can clearly see will lead to other unwanted decisions down the road. That is just poor decision making, and in this case, it is detrimental to children. Remember, this is not just a business. Every decision made will affect every child. My children, my neighbor's child, or your grandchild. These decisions should not be about beautiful buildings, beautiful rooms, and filling space. They should be made about what is in the best interest of every child. What is going on in the building, not just how it looks. I want to believe that any board member that made the decisions in the past had no idea the trouble they would make for the future. You cannot acknowledge that to follow some of these recommendations would create devastation for our children and what this community values. I would also encourage you to be transparent. Transparent when you speak of this unique, beautiful geographic area we live in, and also the uniqueness we should value in our school system. We do not need to look like other counties in the state when we don't look like other counties in the state. There's a private school being built in Florida by the Casa Lakshmi Foundation from Canada that it is based off of our own Crellin Elementary. Crellin has been documented across the country and other countries, and we are looking across our state to see what we should look like. Let's just let that sink in. So again, what do you value? Because given the previous decisions that were made and the hard decisions you are now needing to make, what you value means everything. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Nicole Christian.
Well, I know it's late and everyone wants to get out of here, so I'll stick to my 3 minutes. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm Nicole Christian, President and CEO of the Garrett County Chamber of Commerce. We've already sent you a letter, and along with the Strategic Facilities Committee, but I do just want to reiterate a couple of points in that letter. One, certainly, before you move on approving any of the recommendations, we would strongly encourage you to work with a research institution to actually conduct a complete community impact assessment. We also would strongly suggest that you wait to see what is going to be determined for Kerwin through this legislative session. We know that right now the recommendation is that our local share will go from 27 million to 40 million, and without any way for our community to actually come up with that money. So that's a huge amount of money. And also, we would certainly encourage you to develop a full-fledged long-term strategic plan, understanding that the strategic facilities plan is just a component of that, but in order to really prepare for the future and make sure that we're providing adequate educational structures for our students, we need a long-term strategic plan. I would also like to mention that the Chamber has been advocating for the changing of the wealth formula at the state level, and it looks like through Kerwin, they threw the wealth formula out the window and we got the shaft even worse. And hopefully with the new funding they're putting aside, it's, I believe, House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1. They've already been submitted as bills for this coming legislation. That would put more funding towards the capital projects. So if we can all work together, maybe we can get the wealth formula changed. But we, the business community, does understand that the wealth formula does not actually take into account the per capita household income, and that our property taxes skew that. So, and I did have a question that I would certainly throw out to Dr. Lieber. He mentioned very early on about, he mentioned something about the community opinions, and I would just be curious if that was a valid statistical sample. So, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you tonight, and I know this is going to be a tough road to hoe. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. Dr. Lever, she had a specific question for you, but did you have any other final comments as we begin to take up this?
I don't think I do.
Okay. So I would begin the discussion in one way as we discussion and public comment. what do we value. I think one of the important points is that early in the whole strategic planning process, and a document that was given to Dr. Lever and the committee was a guiding document that we approved, and I believe your committee had this as part of their work as well. So I just will reiterate those values. We value our local community schools. We value academic excellence. We value equity in learning experiences and opportunities. We value transparency in decision-making to maintain the trust of our communities, parents, student, faculty, and staff. We value accessibility to diverse learning experiences. We value co-curricular opportunities. We value robust special education programs and meeting the needs of our most vulnerable students. We value efficient and sustainable services and a streamlined and efficient administration that supports the educational mission of Garrett County Schools. The board has went on record with our specific values, so I want to make that clear. The other point would be as far as school closure, we are not looking at school closure at this point. There is a strong feeling on this board, and I will speak that for the whole board in this way, I think, of supporting the local community schools, and we will continue to have that. But we will have to look, as we have these discussions, we'll have all these options do not necessitate that necessarily. So that's, there's options, and we'll have to tackle those as we look at each recommendation. In looking at what we're looking for tonight is a motion to accept the report of the committee, and then this will then lead into leading us on a timeline of how we will consider these issues. So we'll be considering each issue as we go based on the timelines, and then that might, on each of those, we'll have public comment and opportunities as well. So it might look very different than some of the concepts that have been brought up based on the work of studies and the work of the board and the administration. So that's all there. So with that said, is there a motion to accept and receive the report of the Strategic Facilities Committee?
I accept the motion.
You'll make a motion?
To accept the report for consideration.
Okay. Motion to accept the report for consideration. And second? Okay. Discussion? Katie?
So I just wanted to say again that this is just an overview of different options that we have. And I was reflecting before this meeting about the process that we've gone through. And I came on the board as a student board member last July, and then we went through the RISE options. There were 3 options of different ways to go about how to deal with the upcoming 5-year comprehensive plan. And then I was on some meetings for that, and then we decided to hire Dr. Lever, and then I thought at the end of all of that we were going to have a clear and concise plan of what to do. And I think a lot of our community members that I've spoken with, other students, teachers that I've come across, really want to know, what are we going to do? So I know that that was our plan with Dr. Lever, to establish a roadmap, you could call it, of options, but I want to say that we can't make every single person happy, but if we don't come up with a plan at all, no one is going to be happy. And I think that we owe it to our community to establish a crisp, clear, and concise plan that people can understand and have an idea of how to go about our options in the future. So, thank you.
Comments. Okay. So we'll call the question then. All those in favor of the motion to accept the report for consideration of the Strategic Facilities Plan, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed, no. Recommendation is, so that motion is approved. So that is accepted. Dr. Lever, thank you for your work. We appreciate the work that you gave us, and for the time and the dedication and the work of the committee members. We are very thankful. And to the staff that supported that work, I know that there was a lot of time invested on all sides, and so thank you for that.
So, Mr.
And-
Paul, we will still take if people want to send emails
Mhm.
or anything, letters, we're still taking comments. And then at our meeting in January, that's when we will go over each item that's on the recommendation and vote on it. Is that correct?
What we'll do actually is follow kind of a timeline. So to clarify that, so some of the recommendations we could possibly take, but for instance, we're not going to be able to do some recommendations until we approve other things. So looking at the timeline, like we can look at the joint working group, those kinds of things right away. But then the southern middle side, I think there will be more work. We have to get information from the county as far as funding levels and come to some sort of understanding. So I think some of those will be there as we go through the process. So I think the best thing, we will list those each individually on the agendas of what items we'll be taking up under the report as we go. So that's
So
probably
they'll
the
just
best
have
way.
to look at our website, the community, to know what items will be at each meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah. So each meeting will list what we'll be looking at under that plan. And some months, it might not be anything. So,
Matthew?
yes.
Just a quick comment. Spencer, I'd like for you to tell those two young girls that this Board of Education values more than anything else community schools. We think our community schools are the greatest in the world, and we will do everything humanly possible to keep those community schools great.
Amen.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Thank you. We are moving on the agenda then. We're going to look at some policies and procedures. IKABB, reporting student progress in Garrett County Public Schools. And this one is for action tonight. Does your mic work? It might.
One second. Didn't we say we were going to recommend it for action? Get it seconded first.
I thought she was going to recommend it. That's
She
what I
is.
thought. Okay.
Yeah, but I was going to make it.
Oh, you were going to make it. Go ahead, Barbara.
Sorry.
Sorry, I wasn't
We
sure which one
adopted
was
it,
making
yeah.
the recommendation.
So yes, we're looking this evening at IKABB. I'm recommending that we adopt the policy on reporting student progress. So I'm recommending adoption of this policy this evening.
Okay, recommending the adoption of the policy. Are there any discussion? I'm sorry, is there a motion to approve that discussion, that recommendation? Get the right words here.
So moved.
Motion to approve the recommendation to approve policy AKABB. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Rodney, Mr. Woods, and Rodney. So is there any discussion on this policy?
Yes, I have one.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
believe this is our second read on this. In last month, under procedure, there was a wording, I believe that I had requested to be changed, and I didn't see it on here.
Under the procedure.
Under procedure, yes. Under 2 reporting, when you go to the Roman numeral, the 2, it says ability and maturity factors should be considered when giving feedback and or awarding grades. And I requested the word be reporting instead of awarding grades. And I don't see it on here.
Okay, if you can make that change, that's under the procedure. Thank you. Yeah, I remember that. Anything else? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed to the motion, nay. It is approved. As a result of that one, I think we'll have to retire IKABA. Is there a motion to retire that policy?
I believe it's just a procedure. I don't think there was a corresponding
so we don't have to have
policy.
action. Okay.
Right. So
Just
we will
notifying
be
us.
retiring.
Yes.
We incorporated everything from K-5 into the policy and procedure of reporting progress, so we will be retiring that procedure.
Great. Student board member.
So this month, for GCASC, we held our fall General Assembly on November 15th, and it was a success. The most successful aspect of that was a networking session where we talked with high school students from both Northern and Southern about their concerns and the priorities of their councils and things that they think the board should prioritize. So, for example, Northern's parking lot we talked about the merits of the board focusing on Northern's parking lot versus air conditioning, and they said that both were issues, but the air conditioning was a higher priority. We also discussed different class offerings, especially the lack of an honors English for 12th graders, and different science classes. And we also, students from both councils suggested that board members attend future general assemblies to hear concerns from students and also to update them further. So Southern Student Council, but back to that, we can potentially for the spring GA coordinate that more, invite a few board members to come. I think they would definitely appreciate that. So thank you. Southern Student Council, we held the Ram Rumble on November 27th, which was a success. It was our first year with PBIS as a PBIS incentive, and it went well. Now we are planning an activity for the half day before Christmas, and we usually hold a powder puff volleyball tournament, but now we are exploring new ideas. So we're also trying to get teams signed up during Rams period. Northern Student Council, they are giving out gifts for their Winter Wish Week, which is always a success. They also have started a Candygram fundraiser. They are planning the Spring General Assembly, and they are partnering with the 4 Club and hosting 12 Days of Christmas as a dress-up spirit week. In the National Honor Society at Southern, we collected over 50 shoeboxes for Operation Christmas Child, and we're going to be delivering them to a packaging plant this Thursday. And we also are in the middle of collecting canned food for a food pantry. And then finally, robotics, GACO volunteered at the Festival of Trees, and we held STEM activities and sold Lego Christmas ornaments. We are also holding our FLL qualifier this Saturday at Northern Garrett High School, and that's always really exciting to see a bunch of elementary and middle school kids excited about STEM, and I'm excited for that event. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mrs. Baker has
Well,
comment.
Katie, I asked Dr. Paul if I could say something on Saturday is our annual Rotary gift delivery. So if you would spread the word, I've contacted both schools, but we can do service learning hours for anybody that would like to come.
Okay.
We're at the Faith Evangelical Free Church on Saturday morning at 8:30. I don't know that I'll be finished in time for the first Lego League. I told Mr. Troutwine that I would try very hard to get there. But we will be doing our Rotary project this weekend, so there will be service learning hours available for anybody that would like to come out and help us.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'll pass that on.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Katie?
So some of the students will get to go to the packaging plant then to take the shoe boxes?
So every year, well, I used to go with a church with my friend Holly and I, and then now we just go, the two of us, and we got sponsored from National Honor Society to get it approved as a field trip. So we're driving down and we're dropping off the shoe boxes, and then we're going to spend some of that time at the packaging plant. And we usually spend about 12 hours or so.
Very good.
Yeah, it's always a fun and rewarding event.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Board member updates?
I have one. Last month, I attended the Legislative Committee meeting at Maryland Association of Board of Eds. Very informative meeting. I think one of the values of going to these meetings is to find other counties that are in similar straits as we are as far as the wealth formula, and I did make some contacts down there with some counties that really feel like the formula is unfair for them, just like we feel it's unfair for Garrett County. But some specific things that I think it's valuable to go to these meetings for that, to make these one-on-one contacts, but also learn some things. For instance, there was concern that staff salaries that are going to be augmented by the Kerwin funding probably won't follow the support staff. And so that's always a concern. When you give salary increases to one level of employees, it's sort of unfair not to be able to give those salaries to others. So that was a big concern of the committee. You know that the Stadium Authority is going to, if legislation goes through, is going to release $2.2 billion in revenue bonds for school construction in the next several years. This is going to be, the money is going to be appropriated or given out to jurisdictions apart from the current CIP process. So it's possible that we might be able to get some A&E funds through that, if we opt into that process, or we may be able to get a bigger share of state funding as opposed to the county fund. We need to track that very closely. I think Kerwin funding, what was interesting there is there's a big impact statewide on the local share that's going to go into Kerwin. In Garrett County, that because of the maintenance of effort funding that the commissioners give us, we probably won't see an impact of that until 2030. But in 2030, it'll be a pretty significant amount of money that the county would have to contribute to continue getting Kerwin. But so, you know, fiscal year 30, I mean, it sounds like a long way off, but it comes around fairly quickly. And so I think everybody's correct in saying, you know, it would be prudent to actually do a little bit more than the maintenance of effort formula requires, so that you don't have to have that big hit in 2030. There's a legislation, a lot of other legislation that they're tracking, and I'll be glad to bring that back to the board, you know, as I get more information. I think we have a meeting next Monday. I'll be going to. So I'll probably be giving you a little report like this every month if you'd like it.
Yes,
That'd be good.
please.
And if I find anything else out that you would, you know, I'll send along in an email. Thank you. That's all I have.
Appreciate it.
I have one thing to add.
Yeah, go ahead.
We heard how people are proud of our community schools. I'm proud of our community that we live in. Not too long ago, the middle had spaghetti dinner for 2 7th grade boys that have cancer, and it was a huge success. There was a lot of kids that stayed after school with permission and volunteered to serve, wait on people. There was a lot of money raised for these boys. It was wonderful, the support in our community.
Yeah, it's good to see. I know we also had, of course, our legislators meetings, and we've had several board functions here, so I appreciate everyone's participation on that. All right. Well, we have some informational items, and then we are down to adjourn. It says 8:10, but I'll take 9 o'clock. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting? Motion by Mr. Woods, is there a second?
Second.
Oh, I heard a lot of voices. I'm going to take Rodney this time. I think I took Monica last time. Been moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Aye, sir.